You are impacting lives, and that is why you are having the success you're having.
Well, thanks, man. And I learned, this is funny. It was an Instagram ad, and I'm just like scrolling as I'm like tired trying to go to bed. And it was an Instagram ad with this guy that wrote a book called Greatness. Have you seen this ad? No. Yeah, apparently he's worked with everybody from like the San Antonio Spurs when they were struggling and turned them around. But he used a term in that ad that caught me: selfless excellence.
Hey, welcome back to the bullpen session. I am excited today. I've got a good friend of the industry with me today who everybody knows his name by now. We are going to talk some good things about podcasting. So today I've got my good friend Spencer Smith joining me. Spencer, welcome to Bullpen Sessions.
Well, what's up, Andy? I don't know if everybody knows me, but I appreciate you suggesting that might be the
If
case.
they don't, man, it's getting pretty damn close. Let's just be honest with that.
If they like insurance and self-funding, maybe.
Here's where I know your branding is spot on. If I go do a workshop or I'm at some industry event and I say, who is the first person you think of when I talk about stop loss?
Yep.
Invariably, they will say Spencer Smith.
Yeah, because I'm the only person that associates himself with stop loss publicly. So I don't have a lot of competition there, I don't think.
I actually used you as an example today with Haran. We were talking about Haran. I was talking to the guys there because they had some hesitations around video content and what they should do. And one of them said, I don't know if I want to use the whiteboard. I said, remember, Spencer Smith took a very boring topic, stop loss insurance, and used a whiteboard to make it interesting. Anybody can do it. Right. Anybody can you can take a boring subject and make it interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with you wholeheartedly, man.
We're going to get there. We're going to actually talk about that today. But let's before we get there, let's hit the rewind button.
Okay.
For the people who don't know your past, where are you from, Spencer?
I am from Arlington, Texas, which love them or hate them, is the home of the Dallas Cowboys.
Also the home of the Texas Rangers,
True.
who are finally starting to turn things around. As a baseball guy, they've got a pretty damn good team this year. So.
Well, that's exciting, and I literally tell you, I have not paid attention.
I could tell you're like, yeah. What are you talking about?
I was at a Cubs game the other day, if that helps, but I know that's unrelated. It is baseball, but yeah, man, I confess that is not a sport I follow.
No, you're good, man. We'll let it pass. And the sport you do follow, because you played it for a long time, was soccer. What I was curious, what as a kid, what gravitated to you? Soccer? I got some beliefs of why soccer is a great sport for kids. What gravitated you to soccer as a young kid?
I think when I was playing, I'm an 80s kid, so I was born in 82. So when I was playing, soccer was starting to just be popular, especially as a kid sport in the United States. So I think it was just one of those things that my parents said, oh, let's sign them up for soccer and see what happens. And I found out I actually really, really enjoyed playing. I started late, though. I mean, some of the kids are starting at like 3 or 4 these days. I started at like 7 or 8. Because I don't think youth sports have the same emphasis that they do now. But it was really probably just an accident, man. Played a little baseball. I did play some baseball up till about 14, but soccer was really always my passion.
I think in the United States, I feel like late 90s, early 2000s, lacrosse started to become what soccer was.
Okay.
But I agree. I grew up I was a late 70s kid. Soccer was the thing you played as a kid. And I think it definitely taught you as a child. Like I thought it was perfect for eye-foot coordination.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's easy too. You need a soccer ball and some cones, right? I mean, and that's the extent of what would be needed for practice. That's all. And so you're right. Foot-eye coordination, overall coordination, balance, agility, working in a team. I mean, every one of those things translates to other sports. So I think that's why people start there.
I can remember, Spencer. I was like you. I didn't start. I had a friend tell me I should go out for soccer. And I think I was like 7, 8 years old.
Yeah.
And I remember that first year playing whatever they called it, Pee Wee soccer. I scored like 28 goals. Chad scored like 30, the guy that got me in. I'm like, this is an easy sport. And then as I got a couple years older, I'm like, wait, no, there's a lot of good competition out there. But I stopped playing soccer, I think when I was like 12 or 13, maybe.
Right.
You ended up going on and playing soccer in high school and having a really good career, which ultimately led you to play college soccer. Correct. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, and I was even a little bit of a late bloomer. I started late, like I said, although at that time wasn't necessarily playing a ton of catch up. But I think just physically my development, and then just overall sort of growing into my body, and some of the natural abilities didn't start really coming out until I put in a lot of effort and training and doubled down on my my focus around 16 or 17. And it's like overnight, I feel like I hit this huge development jump. And so that led me to playing in some club tournaments where people were coaches were scouting, and got a phone call out of the blue one day and said, "Hey, would you like to come to Drury University and play soccer?" And I said, "Where's Drury University?" And it happened to be in Springfield, Missouri, and toured the campus, and beautiful in the springtime, beautiful field, Division I at that time. And it was probably one of the best decisions I made in my life, because I almost didn't go play. If it weren't for that phone call and kind of a last minute pivot, I'd probably be at University of Texas not doing anything instead.
What I like about that story, being an athlete myself, I was just having this conversation with a friend here locally because of how extreme travel sports are now. And I'm
Yeah.
sure soccer's club is just like travel and baseball. It's almost like to play college athletics, you have to be seen today as like a freshman or sophomore. And if you're a late bloomer, he was talking about his son, good baseball player, but he's probably not going to bloom until he's a junior or senior, like growth wise.
Yep.
It's too late nowadays. That's the sad part. It's hard for these kids. I didn't get my scholarship until the end of my senior year.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I just don't think that happens anymore because of how extreme sports are. These kids are playing and focusing on it at such an early age, that those scholarships aren't as easy to come by.
Yeah. Well, and soccer is, unfortunate in the sense that because of football and the number of scholarships in college football,
Oh yeah,
soccer had actually a limited number of scholarships overall, but then the number of men's soccer programs in the United States is limited as well, because football's so big, especially in Texas, that there's no UT team, there's no who do you want, A&M team, there's none of those big schools that you think of actually have men's soccer programs.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, University of Oklahoma. None of the
Wow.
big state schools have soccer. There's SMU.
Yep.
It's like the only Division I soccer team that I'm aware of in Texas.
Wow. So when you were playing, let's get to know Spencer, the soccer player, a little bit.
Okay.
What was your position?
So I kind of bounced around the midfield, Andy,
Okay.
in club ball and in high school, central midfielder. So I was sort of the, if you know anything about soccer, I was the tempo guy.
Okay.
I wasn't a full box to box midfielder, but I also wasn't a number 10, which is your guys that are super, super creative. I had some creativity, but I was more the guy that could distribute the ball around and, kind of track the ball around the field. In college,
Okay.
I became a winger because I was pretty quick. I was small, but very, very quick. And so I could sprint up and down that line faster than most people. And so that was the way I could get on the field early on in college, was to be a winger.
I'm interested because, again, I know enough about soccer today as an adult, but not enough to really understand certain concepts. So talk to me, because like Messi's number 10.
Yeah.
What is the guy or the man or woman wearing 10 on the field? You said is
they're the playmaker. So
okay.
Think about the most creative person on the field. Usually in that position, I'm gonna whiteboard it. I need a whiteboard. You sit underneath the forward, the striker, but you are basically the guy or gal pulling the strings for making something happen. They also typically have little to no defensive responsibilities, because you don't want Messi spending a lot of time and energy tracking the ball back to his defensive third. So Messi's the guy that's, hey, you hang around, we get you the ball, and you make something happen for us. And that's what they do.
Are there any other numbers associated with certain positions?
Almost all of them are. Yeah.
Really? I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. Starting goalkeeper's 1.
Okay.
Defensive midfielder 6. The guy like me was a number 11. Your striker is usually number 9. The wingers and, wing backs have positional numbers as well. The center backs, they're all kind of, if you know their number, you kind of know what their job is.
Okay. Well, I'm curious, because I'm sure the listeners are. Did Spencer Smith ever get a red card in college?
In college, no. Actually, believe it or not, I did have one. And it's so funny. The only red card I think I ever got was in high school, and I was complaining to the ref, and I literally go, "That's a load of crap." But that's those exact words I said, and he gave me a red card for that. And I remember my coach made me do bear crawls for half an hour in order to, that was my punishment. And I was so sore the next day. I mean, I was literally sore for a week. Like my arms wouldn't go above my head. But that's it. That's the only red card I think I ever remember getting, honestly.
That's funny. It reminds me, when I was done with pro ball, I played a couple years of adult league baseball back home here. And the only time I ever got ejected from a game in baseball was the most subtle, quiet ejection I've ever seen. So I'm batting.
Yep.
And the pitcher throws an outside fastball and the ump calls us. I mean, it was a good couple inches off the plate. Ump rings me up, strike 3. And literally, like in conversational tone, I say, "Wow, you are terrible today." And he ejects me. I didn't even react. I just walked off the field, put my bat down, and sat on the bench. I'm like, that was the most reserved ejection I've ever seen.
Yeah. Well, you got under his skin.
The dugout actually didn't even know I got ejected. That's how quiet it was. It was just really. That was the only time I've ever been ejected from a game. Well, I'm curious. Looking back at your soccer career, doing what you're doing today, it's a good segue. You talk about the most creative wears number 10. We're going to talk a lot about creativity today. What lessons have you learned from playing sports that you look at what you do today? You're with Pareto, that you still apply today?
Well, man, I was at an Pareto event this week, and I actually had this, kind of reflection. I struggled. So, Andy, I'll give you a little backstory, and I'll tell you this fully answer your question. So, I went to Drury University my freshman year. Started pretty much every game. We were a mediocre but middle of the pack Division I school. I had some friends that went to SMU. Speaking of SMU, and that was probably the best team, if one of the best teams in the country in Division I, top tier. I got a chance to go there, but I struggled mightily because I had this huge shell shock of the level of ability 30 guys as good or better than me in one spot with pedigrees from Brazil, the AC Milan Academy. It was, you name it, they were the who's who. And I hit a wall because I lost my confidence. I literally started feeling like I'm an imposter. I don't belong here. I struggled mightily, and it actually ended up meaning I exited SMU because I played like 2 games and it just wasn't worth it. So I had this reflection at this Pareto event because I'm in a similar situation right now. They are literally pulling in, as we grow, some of the best people in our industry. Our leaders are incredible. And so I'm looking around going, hey, I'm with another situation like SMU where they're handpicking some of the best talent in the country. The reflection I had is I can feel now, 20 years on, that I do belong here, and I'm comfortable with that. And that took 2 decades to go, hey, I do belong, and I'm going to act as if I belong here as well.
There's something I knew there was something I liked about you, because that's your story is my story. When I got to college, I think one of the reasons you look at college sports, everybody comes in as a hometown hero, right? They were all the stud athlete at their respective high school. And now all of a sudden you're on a team with everybody who was first team All-State. Mm-hmm. The difference between those people, I think, that go on to have a lot of success and those that don't, yes, they put the work in, but they also feel like they belong.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, I did a great job in college, but what's interesting, to your point, when I got to pro ball and I found myself on the same team with guys from LSU, Texas, Florida State, the biggest schools in college baseball, I too didn't feel like I belonged.
Yep.
And that impacted my pro baseball career. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's something a lot of people in our industry deal with.
Oh, cool. Of course.
I think there's a lot of people. A lot of people are looking at what everybody else is doing, right? And they lack that confidence to feel like they belong at a certain level of validation, I may call it, as an advisor. And I think a lot of people struggle with that in our industry.
Sure. I had a kid, a young guy, one of our young salespeople, asked me, hey, do you ever feel imposter syndrome still? And I said, yeah, the second I got here, I felt imposter syndrome, right? Like there's this little voice in the back of my head that says, hey, one day they're going to figure out you maybe don't know what you're talking about, or something to that effect. But I told him, hey, even though I'm going to feel that, and I can guarantee our leadership in certain situations when they stand on stage are going to feel that as well. But the difference is how you actually respond to that feeling, right? You either pull back and cower and go, you know what, I don't belong. I should go do something else. Or you say, hey, if I feel like that, maybe there's a deficiency in training or education, or there's something I can do to work through it so that that feeling propels or motivates me to actually respond positively to that feeling. And that was kind of the message I gave to him. But I think the thing that he liked is the fact that I answered yes. Like I'm not impenetrable, right? I'm not infallible. And so I do feel those same feelings that everybody else does.
Yeah, I actually think if you don't feel imposter syndrome once in a while, you're not challenging yourself enough.
Yeah, agreed.
I look back at some of our best clients, Spencer, that we've had since starting Complete Game Consulting are men and women. When I jumped on the first call with them, in my head, I'm going, why do they need my help? And
Yeah.
they've turned out to be some of our best clients.
Yep.
And so you just got to get over that. It's okay to feel it. That tells me you're challenging yourself. You're getting outside your comfort zone, but just keep pushing through. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, and I want to go back to one other lesson, Andy, because you touched on it. I think it's pertinent to talk about. The hard work is kind of like a baseline at this, right? Table stakes when you're around excellent people. Hard work is a given. You literally either work hard or you're not gonna succeed. So I just think knowing that, right, like the hard work probably got you there when you were that all-state high school kid. But like, what is the thing that's actually going to separate you and help you compete when you're with some of the best of the best? Hard work is not necessarily the only thing that you can rely on.
True. Yeah, there is a level of knowledge that has to be there as well, and skill, and I get it. I agree. But with all that being said, don't ever lose the hard work, because
that's what I'm saying.
That's the thing. I look at our industry, and I do think people sometimes sell this destination, and people forget to get there. You also have to bust your ass, right? It's not like there's some magic script out there where just do this and you'll be there in the next 2 months. And everybody wants the result, right? Not everybody wants to put the work to get to that result. I want to ask you a question before we get into podcasting.
Okay.
That I think I didn't intend to ask you, but now I'm going to. You know, you are very good on camera, and you're very good with a microphone. And that's one of the reasons you have done so well with the Self-Funded with Spencer podcast is you are good on camera and with a microphone.
Okay.
But you've also put in practice to be good at it. And one thing I want to talk about, I don't know if everybody knows this about you. You did some stand-up comedy for a while.
Yeah.
And I look back at that and I'm curious, how much of an influence did that have on how good you are on camera now? Because there's a lot of pressure with stand-up.
Well, so not even just stand-up. I also did on-camera acting, like classes and scene study concurrently with that. So 2 slightly different mediums with the same end, like it's an entertainment medium. But I learned all the mechanics, man. I learned, hey, if you want to be good on camera, bust out your camera an hour a day and record yourself, rehearse your scenes. You know, if you're an actor, and watch them back and go, was that believable? Did you do a good job? Was your sightline good? All these things. And then stand up is just a performative art, right? So not necessarily always on camera, but there's a performance aspect through communication. I look back, Andy, and I tell people this quite frequently if they know that I did that stuff. I didn't realize that was preparing me for this. That was preparing me for the podcast. And I might go, man, I wish I'd had a stand-up career, or I wish I'd had an acting career. Actually, I have both of those things. They just happen to be through the medium of podcasting instead.
Well said, because it took me a long time to realize this, because people will say to me, like, you're good on camera, you're good on stage, it seems easy for you. And what I realized was one of the things that set me up for that, Spencer, that I would have never thought about 10 years ago is being a pitcher. You're literally on stage every time you take the mound.
Oh, yeah. All eyes on you.
All eyes are on you. The game can literally not move forward without you throwing a pitch. And I realized today the speaking stage or a podcast to me is the pitcher's mound. And pitching like that with that pressure is probably what helped me the most, set me up the most for what I'm doing today and what you're doing today.
Well, and tying those two things in, have you ever seen that Bill Burr bit? He's a comedian where he's playing catch with his son, or future son, and it's him. He's not actually playing catch. He's on stage doing a bit, but as he's throwing it, he's having this really interesting and funny conversation. But he's performing the art of pitching through sort of the act out, and it's a phenomenal bit. If I can find it, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I think the lesson though with this is people look at what you're doing today and they might think, well, it's easy for a guy like Spencer, but what they don't realize is you have put thousands of reps in.
Oh yeah,
by acting and being on camera and comedy. That's the reps.
Yep. I
have a mentor, a coach I work with, and one of the things he says is the difference between a good speaker and a great speaker is 1,000 speeches. You're just not putting enough reps in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's well said. So let's talk about what your brand has become best known for. Self-funded with Spencer.
Yeah.
So take me back, or take us back, when you had the idea, all right, I am going to take a subject like stop loss and I'm going to start creating content. This was even before the true podcast everybody knows. You actually
Yeah.
had a video podcast on YouTube in a way, self-funded with Spencer. What gave you the idea, or at least the courage to go, okay, I'm going to hit record and I'm going to start talking about self-funding?
Yeah, so why I picked self-funding is probably pretty simple. It's the only thing I felt like I was truly an expert in the insurance industry. And so it was really a function of what do I know and what could I teach? And so that was, sometimes people think there's a grand design and a master plan and you had this great epiphany and all of a sudden you put it all together and orchestrated this fantastic career. It was just, I think I could do this. And that was it. Dr. Bricker obviously is a phenomenal whiteboard presenter. I think he was doing a lot of that at the time. I saw him do that well. And so that's where, the co-working space I had at that time had a beautiful whiteboard that had wood, framing up and down, and the lighting was good in the room. And I just said, why don't I try Stop Loss 101? And I did. Shot it on an iPhone. Didn't even have, microphone equipment or anything, and didn't even know how to edit. So I just loaded it up by itself, and it trended 3 times on LinkedIn in a week with like the top 1% on the entire platform. And I put it up on YouTube and it ended up getting 15,000 or whatever the views are. And I thought, that's crazy. And I just kept going, right? If you do it once, well, you can't just go, well, I did that once and then stop. I said, well, why don't I do another subject of stop loss and another subject? And so every week for 20 something weeks, I shot a video and people started following the hashtag. They started waiting and asking, when's the next one coming out? And I realized I was onto something at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I wish if I went to your YouTube page right now, how many followers do you have on YouTube?
In terms of like followers
or subscribers,
yeah, 2,300 or something.
I mean, that's phenomenal for a page on stop loss, right? And so since the early days of doing it on the whiteboard, you've now turned it into the podcast.
Yep.
I'm going to ask a bunch of questions here because I think this is where the viewers are going to really get value, because I think podcast today is really, people get so caught up in what a podcast is because they think of Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss and all the people who have Alex Huberman, all the people who have the top podcasts in the world.
Yep.
The point of a podcast is not to become a celebrity. It's to create another form of content through audio that people listen to, right? And so when did you realize, okay, I really want to step into this podcast channel?
Sort of another fateful circumstance. I changed co-working spaces, and on the tour of that co-working space, they said, oh, by the way, here's our podcast studio. And I'd been talking to Steve Overton, I work for PlanSide. He's their CEO, or now CPO. But at the time he was the CEO, and we'd been just joking around. Hey, would you ever want to do a podcast? I think we'd be good at it. And he's a tech guy. He's an audiophile. He has all the gear. And so we'd been joking around for a few months that we were going to do it. And then it was like this silver platter was sort of laid up to me. And Steve being in another location, he says, oh, you do it. You run with it. I think you'd be better at it anyways. And I just invited a few folks on, Dennis Fowler being the first. Dr. Bricker was like number 3, I think. And people kept saying yes. People started following it. People kept saying, hey, why don't you have so-and-so on? I'll connect you. And a few people flew into town just to be on it. And then you start going, well, again, I must have stumbled onto something that I didn't plan. But as stubborn as I am, I just keep going with stuff without really any grand design. It's just keep doing it. And it has snowballed to what obviously you see today.
Yeah, no, it's become, I think it's you and David Saltzman, who's got the Shift Shapers, which he's had now, man, I think it's a decade.
Yeah, he's done it for a long time.
You guys have 2 of the top podcasts in the industry. And let's talk about that, because this is, again, if we're selling to advisors that podcasting is another prospecting channel, it's just a channel done through audio. And I'm sitting here going, cool, how do I get started? Let's use your podcast as an example. What you've done a phenomenal job with, Spencer, is you have used the podcast to become known for one thing, self-funding, right? It's not a podcast on everything.
Yep.
And I think that's a key ingredient. How do you determine who your guests are going to be?
It is a combination of quite a few things, right? So there's inbound interest. And every once in a while, I may say no to certain circumstances that don't make sense, but I have a lot of people that ask now, how do I get on, or what do I need to do, or how do I qualify, or whatever. Referrals have been really good too, Andy. You start getting better at it and people recognize that and they say, well, you should have X person on, which is typically somebody that's either founded a business or runs a business in our industry that they think will benefit. So now you have this credibility that comes along with an introduction. And then I do actually proactively ask people. I think of subjects that I would like to cover. Let's say stop loss, for instance. I might try to cover it 2 or 3 times a year. So I go, well, who should I have on that would keep the conversation interesting? So it hasn't been that difficult. I've never used what would you say, a booking company to find guests. Maybe in the future I'll try when I really, really want to go up market. But for now, it's been relatively organic that it's happened pretty easily.
I also think that comes back to the fact you are very clear about what your subject is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's very clear what your podcast is about, which makes it easy to find guests and have guests reach out to you.
Yeah.
How about this? I'm sitting here, Spencer. I don't have access to a podcast studio. And now today you work out of Maker's Gym in Frisco, which if you're an advisor, you want to go get some content done, get your butt down to Frisco, Texas, and set up connect with Spencer at the Maker's Gym. I don't have a podcast studio, Spencer. I'm just getting started. I don't have all the equipment. What advice would you give? Like, how can I get started without having to invest in a ton of equipment?
Well, I mean, I'm going to ask you too, but obviously you and I are on StreamYard right now, which is a turnkey service for relatively low expense that you can run a podcast exactly like we're running right now, and they turn out really, really good. Audio equipment, you've got a Yeti, a Blue Yeti right in front of you.
I actually have. This is a Shure M3.
Shure M3. Okay, right.
But I also have a Blue Yeti microphone.
There you go.
So
okay.
Yes.
So for $100, maybe a little less, depending on if there's a special on Amazon, you can get you a decent microphone. You don't have to. I'm actually using just my laptop right now in a sound booth. I don't have a microphone here with me. I have one at home.
And you sound great.
And a ring light. Yeah. So, I mean, find a spot that's relatively quiet. I don't even think you have to spend $1, Andy, on equipment if you don't want to. But I would say just get started. People often propagate like excuses or barriers to why they shouldn't start because I can't do this or I can't afford that. Like all the excuses sort of trickle away when you really dig into it. I would really just get a few guests, ask a few people, hey, I'm thinking about doing a podcast on this subject. I think you would be a great guest for that. Would you be interested in being on my show? And even tell them straight up, it's my first episode. I had to tell Dennis Fowler, dude, this is my first episode. You're my guinea pig. Would you do it? And he said, absolutely. So find people, and that trust you and just have a conversation. It's not that hard. What's hard is continuing to have the conversations over hundreds of episodes, right? And that's where most people fall short.
Well, and I tell people too, even before you have your first guest, make your first episode just you telling people you're coming out with this new podcast.
That's great.
Why am I doing this? How am I going to do it? Just let people know. It's a great way. So I got a couple questions then from the viewer standpoint that I think would be super helpful for them. Okay, so we've got how do you determine your guests? I now realize I don't need a ton of equipment. You can even use a platform like Anchor that's free to
host. I use Anchor myself.
So do I. So it's free, right? And that's how we host our podcast. Other topic or other questions that might come up that I know people ask me all the time. Spencer, should the podcast be more interview or conversation? What's your thoughts?
Conversational, for sure. I started interviewing at first, more just structuring my questions because I needed to feel like I had a framework to follow. As you get better, you kind of abandon the framework to a degree. Otherwise, it is going to feel scripted. It is going to feel like a 20-minute or 60 minutes interview instead of, a podcast. So I would say, though, don't go so conversational that it meanders everywhere and there is no theme to the episode. I still come to the table with an idea of what it's supposed to be. But then you develop the trust in yourself to be able to navigate between those lines so it's not too structured. I don't like listening to interviews as much as I like listening to conversations.
I agree. I'm glad you said that. Length. Spencer, how long should a podcast be?
I don't want to say should. I'm not going to tell somebody what it should be. I could say it probably shouldn't be 3 hours if you don't know what you're doing. But it probably also shouldn't be 2 minutes. Then it's something else. It's probably more short form clips for Instagram or something like that. But I fall in the range of anywhere between 40 to 60 minutes or so. I do think if you get too long, you better have a really, really good reason why you think somebody would stick around for a 90-minute or 2-hour podcast. I know my audience. I know my audience is busy. I know my audience wouldn't listen to a 3-hour podcast. I also know if I gave them a 10-minute podcast, they'd be like, well, you didn't go into enough depth on that thing. So the sweet spot for me is around 45 as an average.
I heard, I was given this lesson from a coach as well about content, whether it's a podcast, a video, copy on a sales page. Length doesn't matter if the topic sucks.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Focus on the topic, right?
Yeah.
And then worry about the length. This one, I would love your opinion because I got a really strong opinion on this one. You've built Self-Funded with Spencer, and I think it was a good idea from a topic perspective because you still are, you work directly with the broker market.
Yeah.
But I'm a broker and I want to start a podcast. Mm-hmm. What should be the subject? What should I focus on? What should be the one thing I'm known for with my podcast?
I will probably give you a couple different answers. I would think you have to understand who your audience is going to be, right? Who's going to listen to you and why. And also, what is the goal? If this is a hobby podcast on the side and you want to talk about fishing because you love fishing, that's awesome. But if your podcast has the intention, whether it's direct or indirect, to drive business to you, drive interest to you, then you probably should pick a subject that you know very well and that is related to your business. Otherwise, again, it's just a side hobby and it's for fun, and that there's nothing wrong with that. But I would
builds a little personal brand.
Yeah. I mean, that's okay. I mean, literally, if you're the guy that talks about fishing, but people love fishing, and half of your industry likes to go fishing as something fun, great. Maybe you reel people in with that subject. Andy.
Nice word. I like that. There's that stand-up comedy.
Yeah, I would. I picked a subject again that I thought was relevant to the people that I wanted to speak to, and ultimately, it was hopefully attracting them to what I talk about, so that I could get in front of them and sell what I sell.
I like that. I have a little twist to that.
Okay.
My belief is if I'm a broker and I'm trying to attract attention of a CEO, CFO, HR director.
Yeah.
I don't think they want to listen to a health insurance podcast.
Okay.
I really don't. What I think would be wise is have a podcast where you interview clients and prospects about around business topics. Let them, be the heroes. Let them talk about their journeys and what they've done. I feel like that is a podcast where other business owners and decision makers would want to learn from their peers.
Yeah.
Versus listening to a health insurance podcast. And I know people will disagree with me, but
it's pretty saturated at this point. I mean, it really is, Andy.
Yeah.
There's quite a bit of health insurance podcasts and benefits podcasts.
It's a lesson I learned from listening to Gary Vee. Okay. I remember when he talked before I started my podcast, he said, if I were a real estate broker, he said, I would start a podcast in my town, call it the name of the town podcast, small business podcast. And he's like, I would just interview small businesses in my community because they all could become potential buyers for me. Mm-hmm. And that's when I heard them like, that's a good concept. If I'm a broker and I want to grab the interest of decision makers, bring other decision makers on my podcast so they can learn from each other.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I was going to actually look up a gentleman. I want to give him a shout out. I'm not paying attention to you, but I didn't want to forget his name. Christian Mosier. Do you know that name?
I know Christian. Yeah.
His podcast is kind of like that. He's in like Virginia and he focuses on a town. Richmond, I think, is the town.
Yep.
And that's exactly what he does. And it's brilliant because he's a young guy and a young consultant. And he's saying, how do I get credibility with business owners in my city when I'm a youngish as a consultant? And so he's got youngish CEOs or not even youngish CEOs that come on, and it's Richmond focused. So now all of a sudden he's the producer in Richmond that talks to other business owners. I think it's brilliant.
I just had I did a workshop yesterday. We're recording this on the July 21st with a company in the vision industry. So vision coverage insurance space in our industry. And I told them, because they have a very targeted audience, kind of in the middle America, small rural area of middle America. That's their target market. I said, you guys are going to laugh at me when I say this, but somebody on this team should be doing a podcast represented by your company, interviewing small businesses in middle America. Mm-hmm. Because you're trying to put out the brand that we are just like you.
Yeah.
There's not a better way to do that than to interview the people you work with.
Totally.
And I think that's where people get so stuck these days. It comes back to, this is just an audio form of content. Mm-hmm. So this is your chance to brag a little bit, and I know you're a humble guy, so you don't like to brag, but
Right.
what if I said, Spencer, what are the 1, 2, 3 things behind the success of Self-Funded with Spencer? What would you point to?
I think committing to in-person production when at COVID, we were coming out, but I committed to in-person because I was tired of doing Zooms. And I thought, well, maybe other people might be as well. And if I could capture people in one room together, I thought that would be different. Right. I would also say the consistency component of it. I have produced 100 episodes. The episodes I produce obviously have a lot of effort that goes into not only production but post. So it takes a lot, and it takes a lot of scheduling and logistics and time. And then last but not least, I think just being willing to spend the money, even when it was out of my own pocket, to keep the quality high, and then setting a precedent of what I wanted it to be so that it attracted more interest and more funding as a result. So I think it's just a commitment to this hypothesis and leaning as far in as I possibly could to that.
I agree. I think the key ingredient to everything you just said, especially when I hear 100 episodes, is consistency.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the statistic, but it's an overwhelming number of podcasts never reach 10 episodes.
Oh yeah. It's 99% don't reach 21 episodes.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Wow.
And
yeah,
like 90% don't reach, I think, 4 episodes.
And here's what's cool about this. We are today, episode 244 is launching for us.
Incredible, dude. You're going to hit 250 soon.
250. Thank you. But here's the cool part. What I'm sharing with you is spinning it back to you. For you, it's not hey, is Spencer going to hit 250 episodes? It's when is Spencer going to hit 200? 'Cause like for you, you're like, it's not, I'm going to be consistent. Well, it's coming.
I'm in now. And there's no way. If I abandon this now, that would be the worst career decision I've ever made. So now you just plan ahead and go, well, what does the next 18 to 24 months look like? And how do I get there? I'm thinking on a longer horizon.
100%. So the last question I want to ask you about this before we start wrapping this up is, looking back, you've had the podcast now for what, 2-3 years?
So April or May of 21. So yeah, just 2 years. A little
over 2 years. What has having the podcast done for business development for you? Has it played a role in your ability to grow your business? I know at PlanSite, now at Pareto.
Yeah. It sounds like hyperbole, but it's literally done everything for my career, and I can't even. It's hard to suggest otherwise. From credibility, from the network of people I have, I was at the Pareto event this week, and 3 or 4 of the young people came up and said, I learned stop loss on your videos. They sent them to me. I have a guy that's in a very high level position here say, hey, when I found out you were coming, I knew I wanted to come too. So that's all just by being public and being out there. I am at Pareto, no joke, because of my podcast and because of my social media presence. That was the original outreach, was because of that. So everything is sort of a result of that.
I kind of equate it this way. What you've done with your podcast is you've built one hell of a personal brand. Mm-hmm. And I believe once you have an established personal brand, you can do anything. Right? I say that, and I say it this way. You actually can never fail. Here's why. When I went to start Complete Game Consulting, I had built brand recognition. So I knew I had that gave me the confidence to start the company. But I also knew this, Spencer, if I fail, there's always somebody out there who's going to want to hire my brand.
Of course, yeah.
I can't lose. And I think that's my pitch to our audience, to be like, guys, this is why you have to build a brand. It's not egotistical. What Spencer has done with building a brand is impact others' lives. Your podcast, you know this, there are agencies out there that use your podcast as training.
Yeah.
They use your videos on YouTube as training for their producers. Yep. You are impacting lives, and that is why you are having the success you're having.
Well, thanks, man. And I learned, this is funny. It was an Instagram ad, and I'm just like scrolling as I'm like tired trying to go to bed. And it was an Instagram ad with this guy that wrote a book called Greatness. Have you seen this ad? No. Yeah, apparently he's worked with everybody from like the San Antonio Spurs when they were struggling and turned them around. But he used a term in that ad that caught me: selfless excellence. He said he worked with a lot of champions, and even after they won championships, Like that wasn't it for them. That wasn't where they felt the most fulfilled. The thing that he felt like they actually felt the most fulfilled in doing is bringing others along or leading others. So excellence, you have to be excellent yourself to be able to do that. But the selfless side is your job now with that excellence is to, you know, sort of convey it to other people and bring them along with you. And so when I start thinking about maybe what the big thing that the podcast does long term, hopefully my impact is bringing a lot of other people into this industry and giving them great careers as a result of it.
100%. And I say this, and this might sound selfish, but I truly believe the more impact you create, the more you create your own income. Income follows impact. I really believe that. And I tell people, I believe building a personal brand is actually a selfless act because as long as it's being done to create impact on others, you're doing it for the right reasons.
Absolutely. I mean, what better feeling than somebody was able to prepare for an interview because they watched the videos, or they were able to move up in their career because they learned something and they were able to communicate it and establish their acumen around it. Like, how cool is that to be able to have that type of reach?
Well, last thing I want to ask you, man, is like, okay, we got the people listening. They're sitting there going, okay, I'm kind of convinced. I'm still hesitant. What would be your final pitch to somebody who is sitting right on the fence to trying this podcast thing?
I would say do it if and only if you really want to do it. I end up talking quite a few folks out of podcasting when I start to tell them the commitment level that's required and how long it might take to build an audience and all those things. So that's not to deter anybody that's on the fence. I'm just saying, know yourself, know if you will actually follow through with it. And before you even bother starting, like, ask yourself that question. And if the answer is, I don't think I want to do that, go on other people's podcasts, be a guest on other people's podcasts. You still get content out of it and it's still fun, but you don't have the responsibility to produce it yourself.
Yeah. Well, man, I got to tell you, I can remember a conversation you and I had around 2020, 2021, when you said, I got this idea. And, I was sitting on the porch of my place in Colorado and we were having that conversation, and it's been an honor to watch what you've done over the last 2 years, man.
Likewise, man.
I hope you're proud of what you built. And I hope for you listening in, it's not about just doing what Spencer has done and replicating it. It's doing it in your own way.
Sure.
Podcast is one channel that you can use to build brand and actually drive business if you do it the right way. And what I'm going to urge you to do is don't go look at what everybody else is doing and say, I got to do the same thing. It's, why are you doing it? Mm-hmm. Are you willing to put the work in? And then what do you want to talk about? Bring value to your prospects and your podcast will do well.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better, man. Great way to wrap it up.
Spencer, I know you're a busy man. I want to thank you. This has been phenomenal. Any last parting words before we let you go?
I would say be not afraid. Most people don't do the things they want to do because they're afraid of what's going to happen, or they have some fear in their mind or insecurity. I would say be not afraid. Just go do it.
Well, I'll finish by telling the audience, taking the words off my wall here. No matter what you do, be consistent, be persistent, and be patient, because that is the keys to success. Be well, guys.